So now the US has sort of initiated a blockade of Iranian ports. It's like a retaliation to the Iranian blockade of partial blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. How is it going to take shape? How will the US, they can't really approach the Strait of Hormuz because Iran controls that coastline. So how do you see it taking shape? And especially given that Iran has an energy deal with China, so oil will be going via these shipping vessels to China and back. So how is it going to really play out? Is it just rhetoric, or will they actually try and board a Chinese vessel and capture it or whatever for breaking this blockade?
Well, Mr. Trump's Truth Social posts have over the last month, promised everything from apocalypse to peace breaking out. I think if one has to go by his latest Truth Social post, and each post contains within it both the promise of Armageddon and the promise of armistice. Every tweet of his will say, this is what's going to happen if you don't listen to me. But of course, I think that you want to listen to me and that the Iranians are ready for a deal kind of thing. So that's what his latest tweet is about. There's no question that the US has positioned itself in order to impose a complete blockade of all ships going in and out of Hormuz, regardless of whether they can actually enforce that. They are positioned over there. Look, at the end of the day, the Hormuz Strait is important to the world. Why is it important to the world? Because there are these 5 countries that are together make up 25% of seaborne oil exports for the world. UAE, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, and Qatar. They use this Hormuz Strait to get the energy out from there. There's also Oman on the other side, but it's not an oil exporter. So what we are seeing is essentially, for one reason or the other, these energy exports have held the world completely hostage. And we are not even seeing the complete pain that the energy shortages could hold out for us, simply because it takes a long time for these to show themselves. But by May, I think the whole world will know exactly what it means to have the Hormuz Strait completely or partially closed. At present, the Iranian side is holding a kind of blockade. That's for 3 reasons. One is essentially because it is Iran's geographical trump card. In the past too, Iran has said we could consider putting some kind of restrictions on the Hormuz Strait. Nobody believed them. In June last year, that is what the Iranian leadership said. And everybody thought they're never actually going to do this. I mean, it's unheard of, it's an open strait. It's used around the world. There are so many people who will be hurt, whether it's Southeast Asia, whether it's the West Asian countries, whether it's South Asia, the Indian Ocean region, that nobody's actually going to do it. But they've been able to do it. And this was always a kind of trump card or a Brahmastra, if you like, that Iran could have used. The second reason for Iran pointing out the Hormuz Strait is a sort of historical wanting to show its control over it. It always talks about the Persian Gulf in a certain sense, and its control in the historical terms over many parts of this. And I think the third area is to show that that something has changed. If Iran is ready to blockade the Hormuz Strait right now, it is to show that what has happened in the last month has changed its calculations. So whether it wants to use the Hormuz Strait to send a message to the Gulf countries as a kind of Damocles sword hanging over them, and I'm using a lot of these terms simply because there's so much symbolism in everything Iran is doing right now, or whether it is to monetize it and to say, okay, you've not just bombed our supreme leader, our national security advisor. You've caused devastation across the country, damages across the country. We need to rebuild this under sanctions. The only way we're going to do it is if we can charge. So this idea that they would charge $2 million per ship that went through. Or decide which of its friends can go through and which of its friends can't. I think Iran's making a very, very careful point with its control of Hormuz Strait. Is that something it can reverse easily? I don't know. for the US, what it is doing is essentially trying to say, I'll match your blockade with my blockade.
Yeah, but then if it matches Iran's blockade with its blockade, wouldn't it hurt the US and its allies far more? Because you are the one who lifted sanctions on Iranian oil because the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz was hurting you. You lifted sanctions. Now you're saying you're going to blockade Iranian ports. How was that?
I think we're coming back to this idea that the US is not necessarily working as a rational actor here. It is reacting. It is reacting to things Iran does. And as long as it is reacting, it is not in control of what is going to come next. And that should be frightening for the world. Because the US is quite as powerful as it is. Secondly, you're quite right that by blockading Iranian oil, the US is reversing its own move. I'll be honest over here, the sanctions waiver for Iranian oil was not for all Iranian oil. It was for Iranian oil that was already seaborne. And the calculation is that that has already been sold. That has already been taken care of, and possibly those sanctions waivers will come up for renewal in a few days, and the US won't renew them. The third thing the US is doing is, I think, is going to impact its Gulf allies, because this is going to become extremely difficult to maneuver, because once you put a blockade in place, you can only take that blockade off if you get some kind of a deal, or you'll be seen as backing down. And for those Gulf countries that still wish to export their energy and keep their it's not just energy exports, it's trade that goes through the region as well. This is going to become more and more difficult. I think.
But the understanding is that the Gulf countries won't be affected by the US blockade. Only Iranian ships.
That's what the US is essentially saying. But when it comes to moves and counter moves, one can't really tell. What I was trying to say is the US blockade will continue as long as the Iranian blockade continues. The Iranian blockade can at any time stop all ships from going. I think the only answer is going to have to be a multi-party talks when it comes to the Hormuz Strait. Looking at all the various ways in which the Hormuz Strait can be regulated this point forward. Because as I said, we've reached a point of no return. The idea that we would go back to the original Hormuz Strait with free and open navigation, I think is going to be very difficult, despite the fact that India too is asking for just that. We hear External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar say continuously that we want to go back to the old way of the Hormuz Strait. But that is going to be impossible for one very specific reason. Even if you were to have Iran and the US and every other country say, okay, let's go back to things the way they were, insurers are not going to be able to go back unless they have clear guarantees from Iran that their ships will not be attacked. It's one thing to say, let's clear the Hormuz Strait and take out 130 ships that have been stuck there since February 28th. And, those are slowly, the backlogs are being cleared. But it's another thing to tell a new ship to load up in a West Asian port and then go through Hormuz Strait and get full insurance clearance for it. Okay. Therefore, it is possible that they will want Iran to clear every ship that goes. And Iran will then do it in its own regulatory manner, allowing its friends, not allowing others, charging when it needs to. So I think what we're looking at is a whole different negotiation that will be required over the Hormuz Strait, one with which the US has only made a little more difficult, but perhaps is trying to get its maneuvers in so that when they all go to the table. And remember, there's already a proposal that Iran and Oman have been working on to work together to jointly perhaps manage the Hormuz Strait. That is another area that is seen as workable.
So what you're saying is that there is no going back to pre-Feb 28 Strait of Hormuz situation. That's gone.
I think that is the sensible conclusion to make, simply because of the insurers, because of the safety of ships. How are you going to say in the future that you can load up a ship and it will go through as it did in the past, unless Iran gives those guarantees? Because Iran has shown by blowing up 16 ships somewhere in the beginning of this Hormuz Strait blockade, it has shown that it is able to control those. There's another issue as well, which is of mines that have been laid in the ocean bed. There's even yet another issue in that Iran has now said that in order to secure itself from a land invasion, it requires to keep its waters only, to have only its allies and friends in its waters. Which is why Indian ships were allowed to come, but they had to come very close to the Iranian shore as a kind of almost a security for Iran. So it's become extremely complicated. And as I said, just unraveling each of these threads and to go back to the February 28th ways is going to be impossible.